January 25th, 1947. 3:45 in the afternoon. Palm Island, Miami Beach, Florida. Inside a Spanish-style mansion overlooking Biscayne Bay, a 48-year-old man lies dying in his bedroom. His wife May sits beside him, clutching his hand. His son Sonny stands nearby with his young wife Diana. His elderly mother Teresa weeps quietly in the corner. His brothers Ralph and Matt have traveled from across the country to be present for this moment. The man's breathing grows shallow. His eyes, once sharp enough to command an empire that earned $100 million a year, now stare blankly at the ceiling. His brain has been ravaged by disease for nearly a decade. Doctors have said he has the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child. At the height of his power, this man controlled Chicago. He commanded an army of gunmen. He corrupted politicians, judges, and police officers. He ordered the deaths of rivals without hesitation. 7 men were machine-gunned against a warehouse wall on his command during the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. His name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone. They called him Scarface, and at 3:45 that January afternoon, surrounded by his family, the most infamous gangster in American history drew his last breath. But while the world mourned or celebrated the death of public enemy number 1, a very different story was unfolding for those he left behind. His wife May would spend the next 4 decades guarding his memory and protecting their family from the weight of his name. His only son, Sonny, would change his surname and flee to the other side of the country, desperate to escape his father's shadow. His 4 granddaughters would grow up knowing their papa only as a kind man who held them on Christmas Day, never fully understanding the monster the world believed him to be. And scattered across America, his 7 siblings would forge lives of their own. One became a prohibition agent who hunted bootleggers while dressed like a Wild West cowboy. Another managed legitimate businesses and watched his own son take his life. A third was shot dead by police at 28 years old during a rigged election. His sister married a mobster in a ceremony attended by 4,000 people and spent her life defending her brother's honor. One by one, they would carry the Capone name into obscurity, their fates shaped by a brother whose crimes cast a shadow across 3 generations. This is what happened to Al Capone's family after his death, and why their story reveals the true cost of inheriting the legacy of absolute power. To understand what the Capone family lost, you must first understand what they had. At the peak of his reign in the late 1920s, Al Capone was earning the equivalent of over $1 billion in today's money. His criminal empire sprawled across Chicago and its suburbs, encompassing illegal breweries, speakeasies, gambling dens, and brothels. He controlled the suburb of Cicero so completely that it became known as his personal fiefdom. He bribed everyone from beat cops to city councilmen. Mayor William Hale Thompson was said to be in his pocket. When Thompson ran for re-election in 1927, Capone's organization allegedly contributed $260,000 to his campaign. In return, the mayor's administration looked the other way while the outfit conducted its business. Capone attained a level of celebrity no criminal had ever achieved. He attended baseball games at Wrigley Field to standing ovations. He opened soup kitchens during the Depression. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 1930. His flamboyant style, complete with custom suits, diamond pinky rings, and pearl-handled revolvers, made him an icon of the Roaring Twenties. The family lived accordingly. In 1923, Al purchased a modest 2-story brick home at 7244 South Prairie Avenue in Chicago's Park Manor neighborhood. It was a 2-flat building with 6 bedrooms, situated on a 68-foot wide double lot. He paid $5,500 for it. By the standards of the neighborhood, it was ordinary. By the standards of the cramped Brooklyn tenement where the Capone children had grown up, it was a palace. Al's mother Teresa occupied the top floor. Al lived on the first floor with his wife May and their son Sonny. His brothers came and went, occupying various rooms throughout the house. The family lived there the same way they had lived in Brooklyn, the same way their ancestors had lived in Naples, one on top of another, a sprawling Italian-American clan sharing meals, celebrations, and daily life. But the real jewel was the property Al purchased in 1928 as a birthday present for May. The Palm Island estate in Miami Beach cost $40,000, and Al spent another $100,000 on improvements. He added a swimming pool, 2 docks, a boathouse, and an extra garage. The mansion featured sweeping views of Biscayne Bay and was accessible only by a single causeway, providing both privacy and security. May decorated it lavishly with custom furniture, fine china, and crystal imported from Europe. Her jewelry collection alone was valued at $300,000, equivalent to more than $5 million today. When the Palm Island home was burglarized during one of the family's trips, the thieves made off with nearly all of May's jewels in one of the largest residential burglaries in Florida history. The Capones owned multiple automobiles, including custom-designed cars and Lincoln limousines. May herself drove a specially built cabriolet. Al's phone bill at the Palm Island residence reached over $3,100 in 1929 alone. He spent $21,550 on furniture, $6,180 on custom suits, and donated $58,000 to a police widows fund in 1925. While ordinary Americans struggled through the Depression, the Capone family wanted for nothing. Sonny attended the finest schools. He wore tailored clothes. He enjoyed private tutoring to help with the hearing loss he had suffered as a child from a mastoid infection. The family vacationed in Cuba and Hot Springs, Arkansas. They entertained guests at elaborate dinner parties. They lived the life of American royalty. Al's brothers shared in this prosperity. Ralph managed the legitimate bottling operations and became so successful that during the 1933 World's Fair, he was the second largest soft drink vendor in Chicago after Coca-Cola. Frank handled political relationships in Cicero until his violent death. Even the youngest siblings benefited from Al's success, living comfortably in a world their immigrant parents could never have imagined. But this protected life had a fatal weakness. It depended entirely on one man remaining free and in power. And by 1931, the federal government had found a way to destroy him. The collapse came not from murder charges or bootlegging convictions. Even the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the brutal 1929 killing of 7 members of Bugs Moran's North Side gang, could not be pinned on him. Capone had made sure to be in Florida when the murders occurred. Instead, it was the Internal Revenue Service that brought him down. Federal agents built a case proving he had earned over $1 million between 1924 and 1929 without paying federal income tax. On June 5, 1931, a grand jury indicted Capone on 22 counts of tax evasion. On June 16, 1931, he pleaded guilty, apparently believing he had negotiated a 2.5-year sentence. When Judge James Wilkerson informed him that the court was not bound by any deal, Capone changed his plea to not guilty. The trial began in October 1931. Capone attempted to bribe the jury, but Wilkerson was warned in advance and swapped the entire jury panel on the first day of proceedings. On October 17, 1931, Al Capone was convicted of 5 counts of income tax evasion. 1 week later, Judge Wilkerson sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison, fined him $50,000, and ordered him to pay over $215,000 in back taxes, plus interest and court costs. It was the harshest tax evasion sentence in American history. Capone entered the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in May 1932. He initially tried to run his empire from behind bars, bribing guards and receiving visits from fellow gangsters. When authorities discovered this, they transferred him to Alcatraz Island in August 1934. On the Rock, there would be no special privileges. Al Capone, who had once commanded an army, was now inmate number 85. His health deteriorated rapidly. Prison doctors discovered what Al had hidden for years. He had contracted syphilis as a young man while working as a bouncer at brothels in Chicago. He never sought treatment. Salvarsan, the only effective medication available at the time, could have cured him if administered early. But Al apparently could not bring himself to face the stigma of the disease. By the time he reached Alcatraz, the syphilis had begun attacking his brain. He suffered seizures. He hallucinated. He lost the ability to follow simple conversations. In February 1938, doctors formally diagnosed him with syphilitic paresis. By the final year of his sentence, he spent most of his time in the prison hospital, confused and disoriented. On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released from federal custody. He had served 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days, but the man who walked out of prison bore no resemblance to the crime lord who had entered. Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore refused to treat him because of his reputation, so he received care at Union Memorial Hospital instead. He was so grateful for their compassion that he donated 2 Japanese weeping cherry trees to the hospital grounds, trees that still stand today. After several weeks of treatment, Al returned to the Palm Island mansion in March 1940. He would never leave Miami again. For the next 7 years, May Capone devoted herself to caring for her diminished husband. Al wandered the property in a daze, holding conversations with people who were not there. He believed he was still searching for buried treasure on the property. Millions of dollars he had supposedly hidden and then forgotten. He fished off the dock. He played cards with old friends who came to pay their respects. FBI agents planted informants among his medical staff to monitor his condition, still suspicious that his dementia might be an act. But it was no act. Doctors estimated his mental capacity had regressed to that of a 12-year-old child. In 1942, he became one of the first American patients treated with the new antibiotic penicillin, but it was too late to reverse the damage to his brain. In 1946, his physician and a Baltimore psychiatrist examined him and confirmed what everyone already knew. The most feared gangster in America could no longer remember his own crimes. May remained devoted, despite everything. She had known about Al's affairs throughout their marriage. Her hair turned grey when she was only 28, presumably from stress. She once told her son Sonny not to do what his father did, that he had broken her heart, and yet she never left. She was one of only 3 people allowed to visit him at Alcatraz, along with his mother and son. And when he died that January afternoon in 1947, something inside May died with him. On January 21st, 1947, Al suffered a stroke. He regained consciousness briefly and seemed to improve, but he then contracted bronchopneumonia. He suffered a cardiac arrest on January 22nd. For 3 days, the family kept vigil. On January 25th, surrounded by May, Sonny, Teresa, Ralph, and Matt, Al Capone died of cardiac arrest caused by apoplexy. His body was transported back to Chicago by train, the casket reportedly shipped under a woman's name to avoid publicity. The funeral was held on February the 4th in near-zero temperatures. His mother Teresa became hysterical as she was led to the grave at Mount Olivet Cemetery. A blanket of gardenias topped with orchids covered the bronze casket. The inscription read simply, "Rest in peace." In 1950, Al's remains were moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, along with those of his father Gabriele and brother Frank. After Al's funeral, May returned to Palm Island alone. She eventually sold the mansion, but she could not leave Florida. She never remarried. She never gave interviews. She burned every diary she had kept and every love letter Al had written from prison. She never went up to the second floor of her new home again. She lived as a ghost, haunted by the man she had loved for nearly 30 years. In 1960, May joined her sons Sonny and Al's sister Mafalda in a lawsuit against Desilu Productions over the television series The Untouchables. The family claimed the series had caused them humiliation and shame. Sonny testified that his children had been bullied so severely that he was forced to move his family. The lawsuit sought $6 million in damages, but it was rejected by the courts. When the family appealed to the Supreme Court, their appeal was denied on the grounds that privacy rights did not extend to next of kin. May Capone died on April 16, 1986, at a nursing home in Hollywood, Florida. She was 89 years old. She had outlived her husband by nearly 40 years, but she never stopped protecting his memory. She was cremated at a funeral home in Oakland Park, Florida. Albert Francis Capone was born on December 4, 1918, 3 weeks before his parents married at St. Mary's Star of the Sea Church in Brooklyn. He was Al and May's only child. The couple had tried for more children, but May suffered multiple miscarriages and stillbirths likely caused by the syphilis Al had given her. Sonny himself was born with congenital syphilis and nearly died as an infant from a severe mastoid infection that left him partially deaf in one ear. When he was just a small boy, Al and May traveled from Chicago to New York to ensure their son received the best medical care available. The surgery saved Sonny's life but permanently damaged his hearing. Growing up, Sonny was sheltered from his father's business. Al made sure his son knew nothing of the violence and corruption that funded their lifestyle. Sonny attended St. Patrick's High School in Miami, where his classmate was a young Cuban immigrant named Desi Arnaz, who would later become famous as Lucille Ball's husband and television partner. Sonny graduated in 1937 and enrolled at the University of Miami. He was described as quiet, polite, and eager to distance himself from his father's notoriety. In 1941, he married Diana Ruth Casey, a young Irish-American woman he had met at St. Patrick's Catholic School. Her family had deep roots in Miami, and her great-aunt Winnie Coughlin would remain close to Diana throughout her life. Sonny and Diana had 4 daughters in rapid succession. Veronica came first, followed by Teresa, Barbara, and Patricia, who was known as Diane. The girls were born in Florida and spent their early childhoods at the Palm Island mansion, where they came to know their grandfather during his final years. Diane, the youngest, was only 3 years old when Al died, but she remembered him as a warm, loving man who held her on Christmas Day and doted on his grandchildren. The last photograph taken of Al Capone was on Christmas Day 1946, just 1 month before his death. In it, he stands on the dock at Palm Island with May, holding his granddaughter Barbara, while Diane, Veronica, and Teresa stand in the foreground. His granddaughter Diane later described him as glowing with happiness in that photograph, looking healthy despite the devastation inside his mind. After Al's death, Sonny struggled to build a life outside his father's shadow. He tried various careers. He worked as a used car salesman. He ran a restaurant called Sonny's Grotto with his mother in Miami Beach. The Chicago outfit, now run by Sam Giancana, was still providing financial support to Al's widow and son, as they did for the families of all their fallen members. Sonny approached the outfit asking for $24,000 to expand the restaurant, but Giancana turned him down. The restaurant eventually went bankrupt. Sonny then worked as a printer's apprentice before becoming a tire distributor. But wherever he went, the Capone name followed. In 1965, Sonny was arrested for petty theft in a department store, his only criminal conviction. The irony was not lost on anyone. The son of the most successful criminal in American history had been caught shoplifting. The following year, desperate to escape his heritage, he legally changed his surname to Brown. From that point forward, Albert Francis Capone ceased to exist. There was only Albert Francis Brown, a quiet man trying to live an anonymous life in Florida and later in California. His marriage to Diana did not survive the pressure. The couple divorced in July 1964 after more than 20 years together. Diana moved to Palo Alto, California with her 4 daughters, influenced by the advice of her aunt, Winnie Coughlin. Sonny remained in Florida for a time, remarrying twice. His second wife was a woman named Ruth. His third wife was America Francis, known as Amy E. After the deaths of his second wife and his mother May in 1986, Sonny moved to California to be near his daughters. The family reunited during his final years, spending nearly 20 years together in the Auburn and Palo Alto areas. Sonny died on July 8, 2004, at the age of 85. He had outlived his father by 57 years. His daughter Diane remembered him as incredibly loving, a man who showed what he had been raised with. He was adored, she said, and he passed that on to everybody he came into contact with. He never spoke publicly about his father's crimes. He never exploited his family history for money or attention. He simply tried to live quietly and raise his daughters to be good people. In that regard, he succeeded. The 4 granddaughters of Al Capone grew up far from Chicago's mean streets. They were raised in Miami Shores, Florida, and later in Palo Alto, California. Their parents worked hard to give them normal childhoods despite their surname. Diane remembered asking as a child why people made derogatory remarks. Her father would tell her that people did not mean to hurt her feelings. The girls had, by Diane's account, very happy childhoods. Veronica, the eldest, died several years before 2021. Diane described the loss as just devastating. Teresa and Barbara remained close to Diane throughout their lives. The 3 surviving sisters lived quietly in Northern California for decades, rarely speaking publicly about their grandfather. But as they grew older, they began to reconsider their silence. In 2019, Diane published a book titled Al Capone: Stories My Grandmother Told Me. The book offered a personal glimpse into her family's life, drawing on the stories May Capone had shared over the years. Diane felt compelled to write it as a response to the gross inaccuracies she had encountered in various portrayals of her grandparents. In 2022, she published a follow-up titled The Capone Girls, exploring the lives of the Capone family after Al's death. In October 2021, the three surviving sisters made the emotional decision to auction 174 items from their grandfather's estate. The auction, titled A Century of Notoriety, the estate of Al Capone, was held at a private country club in Sacramento, California, and also accepted online and telephone bids. Nearly 1,000 bidders registered from every US state and 11 countries. The items included Al's favorite Colt .45 caliber Model 1911 semi-automatic pistol, with an opening bid of $50,000 and an estimated value of $100,000 to $150,000. There was his platinum and diamond Patek Philippe pocket watch valued at $25,000 to $50,000. There was a 14-carat gold and diamond match cover containing 63 single-cut diamonds. There was jewelry emblazoned with his initials. There was custom china, furniture, and crystal from the Palm Island mansion. And there were personal letters he had written from Alcatraz to his son Sonny, documents so tender and loving that they seemed written by a different man entirely. The decision to auction was motivated by practical concerns. The sisters were in their 70s. California wildfires had threatened Diane's home in Auburn multiple times. She and her sisters realized that if they had to evacuate, they could not save Papa's things. They decided that if they were going to part with the items, they wanted to do it properly while they were still alive to share the stories behind them. When asked how she reconciled the loving grandfather she knew with the violent gangster the world remembered, Diane called it a conundrum. She acknowledged she might never have an answer. How could a man who had the public reputation he had, who was alleged to have done some of the things he did, possibly be this incredibly loving man? She did not know, but she knew what she had experienced. She knew the grandfather who held her on Christmas Day. She knew the letters he wrote from prison. And she believed that truth deserved to be told alongside all the others. But the story of the Capone family extends far beyond Al's wife, son, and grandchildren. His 7 siblings each carved out their own fates, some tragic, some remarkable, and one almost unbelievable. The oldest Capone brother was James Vincenzo, born in Italy in 1892. He ran away from home at 16, joined a circus as a roustabout, and eventually reinvented himself as Richard James Hart, naming himself after his idol, the silent Western film star William S. Hart. He traveled the Midwest, learned to shoot with expert precision, and adopted the persona of a Wild West cowboy, complete with a 10-gallon hat, embroidered boots with spurs, and ivory-handled 6 shooters. He claimed to be part Native American to explain his Italian features. He married Kathleen Winch in Nebraska in 1919 after rescuing her and her family from a flash flood. They had 4 sons: Richard, William, Sherman, and Harry. When Prohibition began in 1920, James applied to become a federal enforcement agent. He was hired and spent the next decade busting illegal stills across the Great Plains. He earned the nickname Two-Gun Hart for his flamboyant style and his twin revolvers. In 1926, he became a special agent for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, enforcing alcohol laws on Native American reservations. He was once assigned to protect President Calvin Coolidge during a visit to the Black Hills. He arrested over 20 wanted killers during his career. By 1930, Richard James Hart was so famous that mail addressed simply to Hart with a sketch of 2 pistols would reach him. The irony was staggering. While Al Capone was building the largest bootlegging empire in America, his oldest brother was hunting down bootleggers on the opposite side of the law. James kept his true identity secret for decades. He only revealed his connection to the Capone family in 1951, when he was subpoenaed to testify at a tax evasion trial involving his brother Ralph. Newspaper headlines that followed shocked the nation. Two-Gun Hart, the legendary lawman, was Scarface Al's big brother. During the Depression, James fell on hard times. He lost his job as Marshal and Justice of the Peace after being caught shoplifting from a grocery store. He was also expelled from the American Legion when investigators could find no record of his claimed military service during World War I. Desperate and broke, he contacted his brother Ralph asking for help. Ralph insisted that James come to his summer home in Mercer, Wisconsin. James made the trip and returned to Nebraska wearing a new suit with his pockets stuffed with $100 bills. He would not say where the money came from. James died on October 1st, 1952, in Homer, Nebraska, the small town he had made his home. He was 60 years old. His tombstone bears the name Richard James Hart. He is buried overlooking the plains he once rode as a Prohibition cowboy, the white sheep of the Capone family who chose law over crime. Ralph Capone, the second oldest brother, was born in Italy in 1894. He was known as Bottles for his management of the family's legitimate beverage operations. Ralph ran the Chicago outfit's bottling plants during Prohibition, monopolizing the market for ginger ale and soda water used in mixed drinks. He was named Public Enemy Number 3 by the Chicago Crime Commission when Al was Public Enemy Number 1. In 1930, Ralph was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 3 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary. After his release, he moved to Mercer, Wisconsin, where he purchased a hotel and tavern called the Rex Hotel. He lived quietly, avoiding the spotlight that had destroyed his younger brother. In 1950, he was called before the Kefauver Committee investigating organized crime in America. He answered questions about his bootlegging days, but refused to name any associates. But tragedy struck shortly after that testimony. Ralph's 33-year-old son, Ralph Jr., had struggled for years with failed jobs and a failed marriage. He had been raised by his grandmother Teresa after Ralph's first wife refused to move to Chicago. Ralph Jr. drifted through life, never finding his footing. After Ralph's testimony before the Kefauver Committee, the publicity apparently shamed his son beyond endurance. On November 9, 1950, Ralph Jr. mixed alcohol with cold medicine, wrote a note to his girlfriend, and took his own life. Ralph Sr. was devastated by the loss. He died of natural causes on November 22, 1974, in Hurley, Wisconsin. He was 80 years old. Frank Capone, the third brother, never lived to see Al's empire crumble. Frank was considered the most ruthless of the Capone brothers. His motto was simple: you never get any backtalk from a corpse. He handled the family's political operations in Cicero, Illinois, using violence and intimidation to control elections. On April 1, 1924, during a contested municipal election, Frank and his men terrorized polling stations across Cicero. They kidnapped election officials, shot campaign workers, and stole ballot boxes. By late afternoon, citizens had called for help. County Judge Edmund Jarecki deputized 70 Chicago police officers and sent them to restore order. When the officers arrived at a polling station where Frank was standing with 2 associates, they opened fire. Frank drew his weapon but was cut down in a hail of bullets. He was 28 years old. A coroner's inquest later ruled it a justifiable shooting, since Frank had been resisting arrest. Al escaped the carnage and took over the family's operations from that day forward. Frank's funeral was lavish. Al closed every gambling den and brothel in Cicero for 2 hours in tribute. The coffin was silver-plated and surrounded by $20,000 worth of flowers. Over 150 cars followed in the motorcade. It was the funeral of a prince, not a thug. Frank was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, where Al would later join him. The younger brothers led quieter lives. Matthew, also known as Amadeo, ran a tavern called the Hall of Fame in Cicero by the mid-1940s. He died in 1967. Albert, also called Umberto or Bert, stayed away from the criminal enterprise. He died in 1980. Ermino, known as John or Mimi, worked with the Chicago outfit but was never considered a leader. He died in 1985. None of them achieved the notoriety of their older brothers. Mafalda Capone, Al's youngest sibling and only surviving sister, was born in 1912. In November 1930, she married John Maritote, the brother of a Capone organization associate named Frank Diamond. The marriage was arranged by John's brother and Mafalda's brother Al as an alliance between 2 crime families. Mafalda was given a dowry of $50,000 plus a home. The wedding at St. Mary of Czestochowa in Cicero was called a quiet affair, but it was attended by an estimated 4,000 people. The couple honeymooned in Havana, a trip covered by newspapers across the country. Mafalda gave birth to a daughter named Dolores on April 26, 1932. She remained a loyal defender of her brother's memory throughout her life, though she was never directly involved in criminal activities. She joined May and Sonny in the failed lawsuit against the Untouchables television series in 1960. Mafalda died on March 25, 1988, at the age of 76. She is buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, just steps away from her brother Al. Teresa Capone, the matriarch who had brought her children from Italy to America in search of a better life, outlived her most famous son by 5 years. She died in 1952, the same year as her eldest son James. She never spoke publicly about Al's crimes. She never apologized for the monster he became. She was simply a mother who loved her children, even when the world condemned them. Today, the Capone descendants live scattered across America, most preferring anonymity over the complications of their famous surname. Al's great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren number in the dozens, though few of them make their connection to the gangster publicly known. The 3 surviving granddaughters have spoken in recent years, attempting to humanize a man the world remembers only as a monster. They acknowledge the violence and the crimes. They do not excuse them. But they also remember the grandfather who held them on Christmas Day, who wrote loving letters to their father from prison, and who died peacefully, surrounded by the family he cherished. The name Capone still evokes power and violence nearly 80 years after Al's death. His Chicago home at 7244 South Prairie Avenue still stands, vacant and deteriorating, purchased in 2019 by an entrepreneur who hoped to turn it into a museum. His Palm Island mansion was demolished and rebuilt, though tourists still slow down to photograph the gate. His grave at Mount Carmel Cemetery receives visitors who leave coins and flowers, paying tribute to a man they never knew. But for the people who bore that name, it represented something else entirely. For May, it meant a lifetime of devotion, followed by decades of solitary grief. For Sonny, it meant changing his identity to escape a past he never chose. For his granddaughters, it meant growing up with questions they could never fully answer. And for his brothers and sister, it meant living in the shadow of a man whose fame outshone anything they could ever achieve. The sins of the father do not always fall equally on the children. Some, like Sonny, spent their lives running. Others, like Diane, eventually chose to confront their history and share their truth. The Capone family story is ultimately not about gangsters and gunfire. It is about ordinary people trying to survive the extraordinary circumstances they were born into. That complicated legacy of crime, family loyalty, and the burden of a famous name was not unique to the Capone family. Another New York crime family would face the same struggles decades later when their patriarch rose to become the most powerful mob boss in America. His name was John Gotti, and when he ordered the murder of his predecessor Paul Castellano on the streets of Manhattan, he set in motion events that would destroy everyone around him. If you want to see what happened to John Gotti's family after he died, watch that video now.